All rise. Veuillez-vous lever? Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Ms. Rambo, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Honors, before the break, I explained how the FROCA claimed responsibility for the attack on the 5th of December on Bangui. I will now move to the period after the 5th of December 2013. During this trial, you will hear evidence that after Ngaisona's return to Bangui on the 14th of January 2014, the leadership role and influence that he had enjoyed while in exile was formalized and strengthened. That day, all the Anti-Balaka chiefs attended a meeting at Ngaisona's home in Boerab, where he was officially designated Coordonnateur Général. There had been no vote, there had been no need. As Coordonnateur Général, Ngaisona continued to mobilize and structure the Anti-Balaka, despite his knowledge of the crimes that had been or were being committed. You will hear from witnesses who will explain that far from being a symbolic figurehead or spokesperson for the Anti-Balaka, Ngaisona was active in building and reinforcing the group. He personally documented and formalized the positions of com zones and appointed National Coordination Committee members, including the Deputy Coordinator. As you can see here, he affixed these appointment letters with his Coordonnateur Général seal. Evidence will show that Ngaisona imposed order and structure upon otherwise diffuse local groups. He summoned local leaders to Bangui and issued them with mandates to replicate the national coordination structure at their local level. He also organized the issuance of ID cards, as you can see here. Throughout the country, formal ID documents of local Anti-Balaka elements bore his signature and seal. Evidence will show that Ngaisona provided the Anti-Balaka with a permanent physical base. His home in Boerab became the movement's headquarters. Using his home as the seat of the Anti-Balaka coordination served many different important purposes. It provided the Anti-Balaka with a stable base from which to strategize, coordinate, disseminate orders, host Anti-Balaka meetings, issue press communiques, or otherwise broadcast information publicly. It provided shelter and protection to Anti-Balaka members and served as a physical symbol of Ngaisona's authority and leadership. Your Honors will hear evidence that with his formal designation as Coordonnateur Général, Ngaisona projected himself as the leader of the movement and was recognized as such by the wider community. Ngaisona spoke, and I quote his own words, in the name of the Anti-Balaka movement and in his capacity as the coordinator of the movement. The formal structure ensured that the Anti-Balaka had a clear line of authority to achieve its political and military objectives. Ngaisona was seated at its head. The troops knew him as our coordinator, His Excellency. Evidence would also show that he spoke in the name of the Anti-Balaka in formal meetings, as their representative and leader. This formalized role provided the group with a semblance of legitimacy and a platform through which to place demands to the CAR government, including to demand specific positions for himself in the government or for other high-level Anti-Balaka coordination members, positions which would allow them to reclaim political power in the CAR. As you can see here, Ngaisona demands the position of director of ENERCA, Énergie Centrafricaine, and SOCAPS, Société Centrafricaine de Stockage des Produits Pétroliers. Being close to the elements on the ground, Ngaisona also asks for the position of DDR coordinator, as you can see in the first box. And DDR, as your honors know, stands for Disarmament, Demobilization, and Reintegration. Ngaisona's reach was extensive. On the 10th of February 2014, Ngaisona affirmed he was in contact with representatives in every municipality, or to use his own words, in French, dans chaque commune. He was in frequent telephone contact with anti-Balaka leaders in the field and personally visited the leadership of provincial anti-Balaka groups or sent delegations from the national coordination in his stead. With anti-Balaka troops controlling huge parts of Western CAR, Ngaisona wielded enormous power over the livelihoods of all Central Africans living in these areas. Evidence will show that Ngaisona expected compliance from those engaging in combat. His influence was such that he could, at will, order for an immediate cessation of whole hostilities. He could also affect the free flow of people, goods, and vital humanitarian aid throughout the country. Conversely, he could order elements to erect roadblocks or cause chaos. As one insider explains, as the general coordinator of the anti-Balaka, Ngaisona coordinated the actions of the movement. If something went wrong in the country, he would call the com zones and would, for example, order them to erect roadblocks. When he said something, everybody had to execute. I received plenty of orders from him to erect roadblocks or to create disorder. As the senior leader, Ngaisona had the final say on anti-Balaka activities. He signed off on missions in the field. As one insider explained, no significant operation could be carried out without Ngaisona's knowledge and approval. Your Honors, evidence will show that after Ngaisona returned to Bangui, he continued distributing money to com zones in Bangui and in the provinces, including to pay for food, accommodation, burial expenses, and other expenditures. The money he provided also enabled them to purchase weapons and to continue carrying out operations in the western provinces. In addition, Ngaisona promised to reimburse com zones for expenses incurred by their groups once they would take power. He also promised them positions in the military or in the government. Again, in a country like the CAR, such promises are hugely significant. Positions in the military or in the government are amongst the only ones that offer relatively stable incomes, incomes that provide for entire families. Ngaisona's perceived generosity to the cause and to the elements secured and maintained their loyalty. As one witness explained, and I quote, Ngaisona gave money to the anti-Balaka chiefs in order to support destitute combatants who came from the provinces. For the chiefs who had no houses, Ngaisona paid for them to have houses. This encouraged people to support him as the anti-Balaka coordinator. By accepting his money, they were accepting his orders as well. In conclusion on this part of my presentation, Your Honors, the evidence will show, beyond reasonable doubt, that Ngaisona, by virtue of his role, acts, and omissions, contributed significantly, if not essentially, to the commission of the charged crimes. The evidence will also show that his actions in doing so were fully intended. Remember that while Ngaisona was exercising his power as National General Coordinator, a position which he assumed voluntarily, the anti-Balaka under his leadership were carrying massive attacks against the Muslim civilian population. Attacks which saw their deportation en masse, their forcible transfer, and their enclaving by the anti-Balaka, which lasted in many cases through the entirety of 2014. All of this and his continued contribution to assist the group, organize, represent it, and arm it, demonstrates his commitment to the strategy to reclaim power from the very beginning and the criminal policy used to achieve it. And this brings me to the second part of my presentation, Ngaisona's intent and knowledge. Your Honors, during this trial, the prosecution will demonstrate that in line with the requirements of Article 30, combined with Article 25.3c, Ngaisona assisted the Anti-Balaka to commit the crimes with the aim of facilitating their commission. Ngaisona was well aware that the Anti-Balaka would, in the ordinary course of events, commit these types of crimes. Further, in line with the requirements of Article 30 combined with Article 25.3d, Ngaisona intentionally contributed to the commission of the crimes by the Anti-Balaka, acting pursuant to the common purpose, which entailed the violent targeting of the Muslim civilian population. Ngaisona's contributions were made with the aim of furthering the criminal activity or purpose of the Anti-Balaka and in the knowledge of the collective intention of the group to commit such crimes. In more plain language, evidence will show that Ngaisona knew about his role, stature, and his influence over the Anti-Balaka. He knew he could mobilize them and that they would listen to him. Ngaisona was aware that the Anti-Balaka blamed Muslims collectively for Seleka atrocities. Indeed, he encouraged this perception and false narrative, knowing that their anger and hatred would propel them to action, resulting in the types of crimes they committed, including the charged crimes. And Ngaisona knew, when he made his contributions, that these crimes were virtually certain to occur in the ordinary course of events. Indeed, they were inevitable in the circumstances. Not only that, when the Anti-Balaka's crimes against the Muslim civilian population materialized, just as expected, Ngaisona made no meaningful attempt to stop them, but instead praised the Anti-Balaka for their heroism, bravery, and sacrifice. I will address all of these 4 points separately. Your Honors, let me start with Ngaisona's knowledge about his influence over the Anti-Balaka. Evidence will show that Ngaisona not only knew, but was proud of his influence. He knew he could direct the Anti-Balaka to stay put or rise up at will. To use his own words in April 2014, he said, and I quote in French,
"When I give an order to these children, I immediately think that that is enough."
Ngaisona also knew that his influence over the youth extended to the Anti-Balaka as a whole. The Anti-Balaka were the youth, and Ngaisona recognized this. Again, in their own words, the Anti-Balaka were, and I quote in French,
self-defense groups exclusively made up of young Central African nationals exasperated by the crimes perpetrated by the Seleka coalition.
Your Honors, let me now turn to Ngaisona's knowledge about the Anti-Balaka's hatred of the Muslim population who they blamed for the Seleka atrocities. The prosecution will present evidence that Ngaisona knew at the time he made his contributions, on the one hand about the brutality of the Seleka, on the other hand about the Anti-Balaka's anger and desire for revenge. From December 2012 onwards, through hateful and anti-Muslim rhetoric, he and others in Bozize's inner circle harnessed this anger and hatred through public speeches and press releases. The fact that the Anti-Balaka's anger caused them to attack Muslims was explicitly recognized by Ngaisona. In February 2014, the group's political advisor was interviewed at Ngaisona's home. On his behalf, he reported, and I quote, "We had no intention of killing Muslims, but we later noticed that so many Muslims in the country were supporting the Seleka rebels. They were against us. This angered the Anti-Balaka as well as the majority Christian population in the country, hence the attacks you're seeing on the Muslims." That these crimes materialized was no surprise. One witness, who was part of the Core Alliance and who will testify before this court, explained that he knew things would end badly. I quote, "God can be my witness that I foresaw everything that was happening. When I came back from exile, I saw the anti-Balaka actions and told some of them to respect humanitarian law because they will end up dead or in prison. I knew all along that things would end badly." You will hear from a frequent interlocutor of the anti-Balaka who said that, "I could foresee that the conflict would be bloody and violent. The anti-Balaka were already going too far prior to December 5th. Your Honor, that brings me to my third point. Ngai knew at the time of making his contributions that the crimes were virtually certain to occur. Evidence will show that Ngai knew that mobilizing, structuring, financing, and arming the anti-Balaka would result in the violent targeting of the Muslim population. After all, the plan to reclaim political power required mobilizing these anti-Balaka. Their desire for revenge was not only notorious, but essential to the strategy. In this respect, the crimes committed by setting the anti-Balaka loose upon the Muslim civilian population were not only foreseeable, but inevitable. In fact, Your Honors, not only did Ngai know that the anti-Balaka would commit crimes, the evidence will show that Ngai had actual knowledge that crimes were happening as they were happening. He had this knowledge both before and after his official designation as General Coordinator in January 2014. While in Cameroon, Ngai received direct information about events on the ground from key anti-Balaka figures. One military insider described it as follows: "It is difficult to remember particular attacks. At times, there were 4 or 5 attacks per day. However, we were aware of what was going on. Mokom was giving orders regarding the attacks. Ngai was also aware of these attacks, and Ngai and Mokom would permanently be in contact with each other. I myself saw Mokom update Ngai. The prosecution will show that upon his return to Bangui, evidence that crimes were being committed was on his doorstep. One high-level government official who will come testify described it as follows in French. Dans le 4e arrondissement,
In the 4th arrondissement, where Ngaisona's residence was located, Muslims were massacred. These killings could not have taken place without the consent of the anti-Balaka leaders such as Ngai.
Your Honors, the fact that the National Coordination had knowledge of the crimes is not controversial, but instead documented. The prosecution will submit evidence that shows that from January 2014 until June 2014, Ngai signed or authorized press releases publicly acknowledging exactions and abuses occurring throughout the country. The press releases acknowledged that, and I quote in French, "Les dérapages sont constatés dans les
There were
rangs des
excesses observed amongst the anti-Balaka.
Or that, and again I quote in French, "Des comportements contre-productifs sont encore
Counterproductive
relevés dans les rangs des
attitudes
anti-Balaka."
and behaviors are still being noted amongst the members of the anti-Balaka.
During this trial, you will hear about the specific crimes that took place throughout the CAR. Those crimes were committed by local anti-Balaka members who were in regular contact with the National Coordination in Bangui, whether by phone or personally at meetings. They were committed in places which hosted National Coordination missions and delegations whose purpose was to report back to Ngai. Finally, as a national coordinator, Ngai was the authority to whom peacekeepers, journalists, and NGOs went to notify the commission of crimes. Ngaisona's knowledge of the charged crimes in the incidents locations, including by Yekatom's group, will be further detailed in my colleagues' further submissions. Instead of intervening to halt the commission of crimes, Ngaisona portrayed the Anti-Balaka as national heroes. In his words, the youth, les jeunes centrafricains, se sont levés et ont
Young
sacrifié
Central
de leur vie
Africans
pour la cause
stood
du
up
peuple.
and sacrificed their lives for the cause of the people. They paid the price for the liberation of our country from the claws of the bloodthirsty members of the Seleka.
And this brings me to the last point of my presentation, namely the question of what Ngaisona did with his actual knowledge of anti-Balaka crimes being committed against Muslim civilians. As you just saw in the press releases, he minimized crimes as mere dérapage or blunders, counterproductive behaviors, or isolated incidents. And although he had the ability to intervene, he did not do so in any meaningful way. When confronted with indisputable evidence of crimes committed by the Anti-Balaka against Muslim civilians, Ngaisona simply was evasive or denied their existence. In February 2014, a media organization which reported the lynching of Muslims by Anti-Balaka stated that Ngaisona was evasive when asked point blank if his militia planned to stop killing Muslims. In a April 2014 radio interview, Ngaisona said, and I quote in French, Grande a été ma surprise d'écouter
I was
sur les voix
greatly
de
surprised to
Radio
hear
Nationale
over
l'accusation portée contre les anti-Balaka.
RFI, the national radios, the accusations made against the Anti-Balaka. I will say no, no, and no.
The denial of the crimes was not innocent, but was made first of all for the purpose of buying popular support for the Anti-Balaka, which in turn was essential to its survival and to reach the objective of reclaiming power. And secondly, to impede the CAR government and the international community from intervening effectively to protect civilians or to end the Anti-Balaka's control over the territory, their most important assets and leverage over the government. The prosecution will present evidence that when not falsely denying the occurrence of crimes, Ngaisona resorted to point the finger at so-called fake Anti-Balaka. The argument being that they were fake because they committed crimes. The Anti-Balaka name was not to be tarnished by the wrongdoing of these infiltrators in their ranks. Yet, for all his denials, Ngaisona knew that the crimes were serious. So serious that, as one witness recounts, he advised unruly Anti-Balaka elements to be careful, as they might one day be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. The evidence will show that Ngaisona's paltry efforts to address Anti-Balaka criminality were motivated at least in part by a desire to stay out of this very courtroom. He created a military police, but staffed it with known criminals. He intervened to protect Muslim civilians in a handful of isolated cases, but left thousands of others to be expelled, enclaved, to starve, and to die at the hands of Anti-Balaka elements under his coordination for months on end. In conclusion, Your Honors, the Anti-Balaka's crimes against Muslim civilians were everywhere during the charged period. Ngaisona's failure to take meaningful steps to stop or even impede Anti-Balaka crimes belies his state of mind throughout the entire period of his contributions. He knew the whole time that the Anti-Balaka would commit the charged crimes against the Muslim civilian population because he helped them to do so, because they had committed these types of crimes and because they were committed such crimes. ssona helped them through his many contributions because it was in his interest and those of a few others to reclaim power in the CAR. ssona''s fortification of anti-Balaka groups was disastrous for Central African Muslims. The consequences of his failures to act were equally severe. ssona''s refusal to acknowledge crimes and his defense of anti-Balaka heroism served to endorse and encourage anti-Balaka misconduct when he was one of the few who had the power to effect it, if not stop it. Your Honors, this concludes my submissions on ssona''s individual criminal responsibility, and my colleague, Mr. Iverson, will address you on the criminal responsibility of Mr. Yekatom.
Thank you. You may continue.
We will need to have a very small break to let him into the courtroom.
Yeah, no problem. We have already heard that you are here on a rotating basis, so to speak. No problem. Perhaps in the meantime, I can remind everyone also for the future, because these are recurring themes during a long procedure, really to have in mind the need for the translators to follow us. I'm also one of those who is always too quick, but please keep it in mind. I hear music, but I think that is not the beginning of the presentation.
I don't know, Your Honor. Maybe somebody made some entrance music for me.
This was obviously an indication that shortly a connection was lost. So it was not your anthem, so to speak. You may start.
Fair enough. Thank you, Your Honors. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Iverson, and I'm a trial lawyer, and it's my privilege today to represent the Office of the Prosecutor. I will now turn to the criminal responsibility of Alfred Yekatom. Alfred Yekatom, also known as Rambo, he was born in Bimbo near Bangui and is 46 years old. He was a chief corporal in the Faka before the March 2013 Seleka coup. Mr. Yekatom had previously fought as one of the Liberateurs who installed Bozize as president in 2003. He did so alongside key figures who would later become the leadership of the anti-Balaka and with whom he stayed in contact during the relevant period. Alfred Yekatom was an anti-Balaka leader, a calm zone. Having fled to the DRC after the coup, he gathered thousands of others who had also fled. He organized them in a military-like hierarchy. Upon returning to a deeply fractured CAR, he commanded these anti-Balaka elements and encouraged them to take revenge. They were united by hatred of the Seleka and anyone they perceived to be supporting Seleka. Mr. Yekatom harnessed that hatred. He structured them, he trained them, equipped them, and commanded them, shaping them into a force that caused death and destruction. Mr. Yekatom's affiliation with the wider anti-Balaka group is clear from high-level meetings he attended, as well as other documents, such as this press release on your screens dated 3 July 2014, signed by him, in which he reaffirms his role as an anti-Balaka commander and his commitment to the national coordination, including in ssona. Alfred Yekatom presented himself and was recognized by the anti-Balaka leadership as a powerful calm zone. His key role in the conflict was even recognized by the international community and earned him a place on the UN sanctions list, among others. Alfred Yekatom's hatred of Muslims was well known. He made no secret of his desire to see all Muslims leave the country. His violent character wasn't a secret either, as he had no hesitation to kill and threaten in public. In June 2013, Mr. Yekatom gathered over 1,000 individuals. He based this group in the bush in Kalangoi, DRC. They began military training, learning to use machetes, knives, guns, and AK-47 rifles. During this time, Mr. Yekatom was in frequent contact with the anti-Balaka leaders who were in Gobere. After a period of preparation and over 3 months training, Yekatom's group participated in the 5th December attack on Bangui. They attacked together and with other groups of anti-Balaka. The anti-Balaka National Coordination planned a multi-directional offensive into Bangui. Yekatom's group was to attack from one of those directions, from the south. The staging point for Yekatom's group was the Boeing Junction. The attack commenced in the early morning hours on the 5th of December. From the Boeing Junction, Yekatom's group split up, taking different routes into Bangui, using 3 different avenues of approach and attacking as they went. Mr. Yekatom, called Rambo by his elements, led one of the 3 groups into Bangui on the 5th of December. And he was on the phone coordinating with the other leaders, his deputies, Habib Bena and Coeur de Lion. And he met with them beforehand to plan the attack. In the words of a witness who participated in that attack, and from whom you will hear testimony, quote, Rambo, Habib, and Coeur de Lion were in charge. They were the ones speaking, and the others were listening, unquote. Before, during, and after the attack, he stayed in frequent contact with the anti-Balaka leadership in Zongo, in the DRC. Yekatom's anti-Balaka elements killed at least 10 Muslim civilians during that attack. They burned houses and shops and destroyed and desecrated the local mosque. The scale and impact of this attack will be explained by my colleague, Mr. Leddy, in one of the next presentations. And he will also deal with some of the direct orders given by Mr. Yekatom during the attack. I'll now show you a video from 2 days after the attack on Bangui. It depicts Mr. Yekatom walking at the head of his elements. This is a French video. The ERN is CAR OTP 2065-0396. The ERN of the transcript is CAR OTP 2107-6918, and this will be a site translation.
De rentrer par ici, hein. On sort là-bas, ça va tirer l'intention des gens d'affluer, c'est pas bon.
Well, you'll go from this angle.
Donc, est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer qui vous êtes?
Could you explain who
Oui,
you are?
moi c'est caporal chef Rambo Alfred,
I
ici de la
am
garde républicaine des bâtons
Yekatom.
provinciaux.
Donc, vous êtes un FACA.
Oui, je suis PACA.
Donc, est-ce que vous pouvez nous confirmer que l'attaque
Could you tell us about the attack that just happened?
des anciens FACA?
Oui, c'est vrai, partout c'est des FACA, parce que depuis que
Yes, it's FACA.
les
because
sélecats sont rentrés, ils ont chassé des FACA. Ils
they've
ne veulent pas
chased the
travailler avec les
FACA.
FACA. Bon, nous on voit mieux
We
pour
are
libérer le
going
peuple
to
centrafricain.
do
C'est par rapport à ça
better.
que
We want to
les FACA
do
sont
something for
organisés.
the Central
La
Africans.
révolution des forces armées centrafricaines pour le peuple.
We are the
Nous, on
forces
est là
for
pour
the
libérer
African
le peuple.
people.
Est-ce que vous comptez mener d'autres actions?
Are you going to take
Non, nous,
other
notre
attacks?
problème c'est d'organiser.
We must
Que
organize.
le FACA retourne. Si on ne veut
with
pas que le FACA
FACA.
retourne, on doit aller jusqu'au bout.
We have to go until the bitter end.
Vous étiez combien d'hommes à peu près il y a 2
How
jours?
many men have you
Oui,
got?
bon, présentement dans mon base,
Right
là,
now,
de
here?
l'autre côté, moi j'ai mis 500 hommes,
About
et d'autres qui sont de l'autre côté
500,
encore. Actuellement, on
and
n'est
there's
pas
some
prêts.
on the other side.
Vos armes et vos munitions,
Bon, ici on a des militaires, hein.
We military.
vous les avez gardés d'avant?
On a des militaires.
We
Je
military.
commence l'acte par rapport à
It's
les petites bases des scellés. On
Act
commence à
on,
attaquer.
from small
Nos munitions, tout par les scellés.
cells.
I get a notice here that there is another speaker coming after the current one. So. Okay, you have to switch to then, obviously, if I understand it correctly.
No, I was informing the presiding judge that a second speaker will come after you, so you will do exactly the same process.
Oh, I understand. Yes, of course. We'll proceed in accordance with your instructions, Your Honor, of course. So I'm not entirely sure that the interpretation picked up all of that video. We do intend to submit that video into evidence, but I will say this: in the video clip, we saw Mr. Yekatom present himself as a chief corporal and a member of the FACA. He explained that when the Seleka took power, they chased the FACA and didn't want to work with them. As FACAs, they organized in order to free the Central African people. When asked how many men participated in the 5th December attack, he answers that he has 1,500 men in his base, and that there are anti-Balaka in other places, that they are everywhere. He tells us that they are military and that they take weapons and ammunition after attacking Seleka military bases. Following the 5th December 2013 attack, Mr. Yekatom established a base at the Yamwara School in Boeing, what can be fairly characterized as a suburb of Bangui, where he continued training his elements, which he had increased to around 3,000 members. Yekatom and his elements were based in the south of Lobe Prefecture, marked on this map before you. From the Yamwara school base, Mr. Yekatom deployed his elements in the area along the roads between PK9 and Mbaiki, and between Pisa and Mongumba, indicated on this map. Yekatom's elements achieved control over this territory through a series of attacks against Muslim communities, targeting several settlements along the route from Bangui to Mbaiki. As Yekatom's elements controlled an increasingly larger area heading in the direction of Mbaiki, in the words of an insider witness, quote, "The next place on the way to Mbaiki was Sekia, next in Nagala. We took it, then Bimon, Kapu, and Pisa. The Seleka began fleeing of their own volition. We took the villages without fighting," unquote. Mr. Yekatom moved to set up more bases, including Boeing, PK9, Sekia, and the États-Unis training camp around 25 kilometers from Bimon. He set up roadblocks, checkpoints at strategic locations. One witness states that, quote, "Yekatom patrolled the barricades on his red motorbike to collect the money, goats, sheep, and whatever they extorted from people," unquote. Along key roads, Yekatom was regulating the flow of individuals and extorting money from passing vehicles, taking cash and supplies. Around 30 January 2014, Yekatom's elements reached and took control of Mbaiki. At the time, Mbaiki hosted between 10,000 and 15,000 Muslims. And I say hosted because that number included the thousands of Muslims who had fled there. Yekatom's group targeted these people. They killed and destroyed property in the Muslim community. Alfred Yekatom is criminally responsible for the crimes committed by him and by his troops throughout Lubei Prefecture and Bangui. These, Your Honors, are the confirmed crimes of attacks on the civilian population of the southwestern CAR, murder, forcible transfer, displacement, persecution, attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, inhumane acts, torture, imprisonment, and the enlistment and use of children under the age of 15. Some of these crimes were committed by Mr. Yekatom personally, particularly the crimes of torture and imprisonment carried out at the Yamwara school, and also his use of child soldiers. Other crimes were committed jointly with members of his command, including his deputies, Wanzhou and Habib Bena, and elements of his group. For Mr. Yekatom to be held criminally responsible as a co-perpetrator for these crimes, there must have been a common plan between two or more persons, including the accused, and it must include a critical element of criminality. Throughout the commission of the crimes charged, Mr. Yekatom, his command, and elements of his group acted with a common plan. Their objective was to violently target the Muslim civilian population in the southwestern CAR, Yekatom's area of operations. These civilians were perceived as being one with, complicit with, and supportive of the Seleka, based on their religious, national, or ethnic affiliation. In response to the very real pain inflicted by the Seleka, Yekatom's group took revenge on not just the Seleka, but on all Muslims. Their plan took the cruel narrative of the anti-Balaka and made it a reality. The common plan was inherently criminal. It involved a vengeful and violent attack on Muslim civilians. It involved the commission of all of the many crimes charged. These crimes not only fell within the scope of the plan itself, but were fundamental to its execution. The crimes committed by members of Yekatom's group were an intended, a natural, and a direct result of the implementation of the common plan. Mr. Yekatom was a central figure in carrying out the common plan. He made essential contributions to it. He provided his elements with the means to commit the crimes by purchasing and distributing weapons and ammunition. Yekatom's elements carried machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, hand grenades, Kalashnikovs, hunting rifles, and machetes. He also provided for the elements who were to execute the plan. He gave them money that had been procured at the many checkpoints. These funds were to be used to pay for their fuel, food, and medical treatment. The common plan did not stand in isolation. We have heard from my colleagues that the anti-Balaka and CAR operated in furtherance of a common purpose, which involved the targeting of the Muslim civilian population of the CAR. They were motivated by revenge and united by their shared hatred of Muslims. The crimes of Yekatom and his elements paralleled the pattern of crimes that were being committed by anti-Balaka groups throughout the Western CAR. Mr. Yekatom was involved in the national coordination and fully cognizant of their common purpose. He knowingly and intentionally became a fundamental and strategic tool of the anti-Balaka and the common purpose. Mr. Yekatom told his elements that the enemy were not just members of the Seleka, but also Muslims and, quote, foreigners, unquote, to be, quote, slaughtered and exterminated, unquote, including women and children. An insider witness from whom you will hear testimony states, quote, Rambo instructed us to kill Selekas and Muslims. He told us that we should attack the Muslims and break their houses. Rambo said that if we capture Muslims, we were to tie them up with a rope and then slit their throats, unquote. Another witness states, quote, Rambo said that we were traitors, and traitors deserve to die, unquote, for merely being in the company of Muslims. A third witness reports that Rambo and other anti-Balaka leaders said, quote, every Muslim that passes, we will slaughter. They said that all Muslims to travel the road to Mbaiki would be slaughtered. This meant to include all Muslims, armed or not, as armed and unarmed Christians had been killed, unquote. Mr. Yekatom's involvement in the crimes alleged goes beyond his knowing contributions to their commission. Mr. Yekatom was, at all relevant times, a leader and a commander. He was present on the ground with those elements and was the head of a military-like hierarchy. He was in control and in charge. Mr. Yekatom presented himself as the leader of his group. He was recognized as the leader by his subordinates, by the anti-Balaka coordination, and by the CAR authorities, and by the international community. A journalist from whom you will hear testimony states, quote, "He told me he was a commander, and he appeared to be in command of the camp. He seemed respected by the other individuals at the camp. He also arranged for our travel to another anti-Balaka base by telling someone to take us there," unquote. An insider tells us, quote, "We chose Yekatom as one of the comm zones to represent the anti-Balaka. We chose him to go to Brazzaville because we knew that his elements listened to him and followed his instruction," unquote. Another witness, insider witness, told us, quote, "Only Coeur de Lion, Habib Bena, or Aristide Bena could stand up to Rambo. I don't remember any of them ever doing so. I don't remember anyone ever disobeying him. I always obeyed him and executed his orders. I would not have survived if I had disobeyed him," unquote. Mr. Yekatom gave orders to his subordinates, issued authorizations to pass through checkpoints, set missions, and arranged the appointment and replacement of subordinate leaders. He was in charge of the discipline of his group. His, quote, "orders were to be obeyed without question," unquote, and disobedience was severely punished. An insider witness states, quote, "Rambo told us we had to burn houses. If you didn't do as he told you, he would kill you. I believed him because I saw him once kill an element who had a cell phone in his pocket. Rambo accused him of being a traitor. Rambo slit his throat and buried him," unquote. As a chief, Mr. Yekatom was acting through Yekatom's group, an organized and hierarchical apparatus of power, to commit the crimes alleged. Your Honors, I would like to show two exhibits. The first is a screenshot of a video. And if you could, just please note the position of Mr. Yekatom sitting in the foreground, wearing a black shirt and talking to his men. I would also like you to notice the position of a second man wearing a red shirt. He's sitting 2 spots down. I would ask you to pay close attention to what the man is holding in his hand, a smoke grenade. Now I'd like to show video. This video was taken shortly before the image we just saw. It depicts the same hut with that gathering of Mr. Yekatom and his men sitting just inside. This video depicts the man in the red shirt explaining the purpose of the item he's holding, smoke grenade. Please play the video. This is a...
Là, c'est une arme furigène. Lui, c'est
This
comme l'autre.
is an arms, a type of arm.
Pas furigène.
It's tear gas.
La commangeur.
It's tear gas.
L'anti-agresseur. Là, c'est initialement pour les musulmans qui
It's
sont
for the Muslims who are inside.
Comment dirais-je?
How should I put it?
Bon, tout simplement pour lancer.
Well, it's simply that we throw it inside
dans leur maison,
into their homes,
qu'ils puissent sortir.
and then they're forced to get out.
Étouffer.
They stifle.
On les tue.
And then when they come out, we kill
Les
them.
petits enfants aussi, on les
We
tue.
kill everybody, including small children.
On a trop souffert.
We have to do that.
Nous, on est des militaires.
We are military.
So here you saw one of Yekatom's men explaining how the anti-Balaka used the smoke grenades. Without any apparent fear of being overheard by Mr. Yekatom, he casually explains how they throw the grenade into the Muslim houses to smoke them out. When they do, he says, they can kill them all, even the small children. Despite his knowledge of their anti-Muslim animus, which he shared, Mr. Yekatom encouraged such members of his group and promoted their objectives. He placed these individuals in positions of authority within his group despite, or rather, because of their hatred of Muslims. Mr. Yekatom provided these elements with the opportunity to commit the crimes charged, placing them in towns and villages throughout the areas he controlled. He did not prevent or punish their crimes, but tolerated, even championed them within the ranks of his group. He readily redeployed them to areas where they committed similar crimes. Throughout his time as an anti-Balaka leader, Mr. Yekatom led operations and ordered attacks on Muslim civilians. He ordered his anti-Balaka elements to do such things as slit throats, cut off ears, execute victims, and bury people alive. He ordered his elements to pillage and destroy Muslim homes and mosques, quote, so they will go back to their country, unquote. He requested and received updates regarding the situation on the ground and was present when his elements committed crimes. Your Honors, in this case, we will establish through the evidence that Mr. Yekatom intended the commission of these crimes. He planned, ordered, and participated in their commission. He knowingly and intentionally contributed to the common plan, fully aware that its implementation would result in the commission of crimes. In doing so, he became a key driver in a common plan which, as a core objective, aimed to attack Muslim civilians. He did this in concert with the violent and hateful campaign of the anti-Balaka. Further, the evidence will establish that Mr. Yekatom was aware that his actions were part of a widespread, systematic attack. He was aware and intended for this attack to target Muslim civilians. He was aware that he was participating in an armed conflict, and those Muslim civilians, mosques, and the homes of Muslim families were not an active part of that conflict. Your Honors, those are my submissions. With your leave, I would ask to go through the same procedure and give the floor to Mr. Letty, who will speak to Mr. Yekatom's crimes in more detail.
Fine with us.
Thank you very much, Your Honors.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors.
Good afternoon.
May it please the court. My name is Nick Letty. I'm a trial lawyer with the Office of the Prosecutor. I'll describe the first two charge incidents in a bit more detail, starting with the anti-Balaka's 5th December 2013 attack on Bangui, including its suburbs of Boeing and Catin, and then moving to Yekatom's base at the Yamoir school in Boeing later that month. With respect to the Bangui attack, both accused are charged with counts 1 through 6 and 8 for this incident. After providing the background and underlying facts for these crimes, I will discuss the intent and knowledge of Yekatom and then ssona. Bangui is the capital of the Central African Republic. As your honors can see from this map, Bangui is situated on the Ubangi River, just across from Zongo in the DRC. In 2011, Bangi's population stood at 740,000. Boeing borders the west side of Bangui, southwest of the Mpoko airport, as indicated on the second map, which you can see and the yellow circle indicated on the lower left of the map. Before the conflict, approximately 130,000 Muslims resided in the city's neighborhoods and 8 arrondissements. The city's demographics changed after the Antibalaka attacked in the early morning hours of 5th December 2013. That morning, Antibalaka leaders executed a coordinated offensive on Bangui and Boeing as part of a larger campaign across western CAR in towns such as Bosangoa, hundreds of kilometers to the north, and Boda, over 160 kilometers to the west. Despite clashes with armed Seleka groups in some of these areas, the Muslim civilian population in western CAR remained the primary object of the broader Antibalaka attack. Taking Bangui, the capital of CAR, and the seat of government was an obvious and essential component of the strategy to reclaim power by François Bozizé, Ngai ssona, Maxime Mokom, and others. The evidence will show that Maxime Mokom coordinated the offensives in Bangui and Bosangoa while based in Zongo. The evidence will further show that Ngai ssona played an important role in the planning of the 5th December 2013 attack and in the coordinated campaigns in Bangui, Bosangoa, and elsewhere. Ngai ssona provided money and issued instructions to the Antibalaka for the Bangui attack. For example, the evidence will show that in October 2013, leading up to the attack, Ngai ssona and others provided money to the Antibalaka in Zongo, such as Maxime Mokom, for the purpose of buying ammunition. Insider witnesses will testify that Yekatom himself obtained weapons and ammunition for his elements from Maxime Mokom in Zongo prior to the 5th December 2013 attack. Further underscoring Ngai ssona's planning role, as my colleagues mentioned earlier, the evidence will show that in November 2013, Ngai ssona issued at least 4 instructions to different Antibalaka groups to attack Bangui, including from Bosembele in the north and from Zongo to the south, just across the river from Bangui. The evidence proving the 5th December 2013 offensive on Bangui will include several witnesses, such as insiders, victims, journalists, and overview witnesses who provide accounts of the Antibalaka's campaign to target Muslim civilians. In addition, corroboration of the planning and execution of this attack will come in the form of documents, photographs, videos, call data records, email evidence, and satellite imagery. The evidence will show the role of the Antibalaka, and I will focus in particular on Yekatom's group and their murder, forcible transfer, deportation, displacement, and persecution of the Muslim civilian population in Bangui and Boeing, and their attacks against at least one of their mosques in Boeing. The evidence will show Yekatom liaised with key Antibalaka insiders, including Maxime Mokom, the de facto coordinator for operations, to ensure the attack was well coordinated and that his elements were armed. Yekatom's group was one of several Antibalaka groups executing this coordinated attack around the city of Bangui. Your honors can see this picture, which shows one such group on the outskirts of Bangui, one day before the 5th December attack. The photographer described their plans to attack Bangui, and I'll quote the French.
He told us himself that they were Antibalaka. One of them said that the Antibalaka would attack Bangui.
Around the time this photo was taken, Yekatom was nearby, leading his Antibalaka group in preparation for the 5th December attack. Yekatom led at least 1,000 of his elements from Kalangoi in the DRC through Bangui and Catin, where they were joined by another 500 of his elements. Yekatom himself directly participated, leading his elements along with 3 deputies. Yekatom's intent to target Muslim civilians was clear in the orders he gave to his elements. 2 anti-Balaka witnesses from Yekatom's group who participated in the attack will show this. One witness recalled that Yekatom, quote, brought all the elements together and instructed us to kill Selikas and Muslims. This witness also described Yekatom's orders to, quote, go to PK5 and find the Muslims and Selika. He told us that we must destroy the Muslim houses so they will go back to their country. The second witness from Yekatom's group will describe receiving orders for this attack from Yekatom and members of his command. Deputy Freddy Wanjo, whose alias is Coeur de Lion, and Habib Beina. As you can see from the screens in front of you, one insider's evidence is that, quote, the aim was to attack the Arabs because when the Selika came, all the Muslims became Selika. All Muslims were to be regarded as the Selika and therefore our enemies. Their witness specified, quote, we were told that they were all the same, whether they were men, women, or children. Even if they are children, they had to be killed. We were told this by our chiefs many times. I heard this said by Rambo, Coeur de Lion, and Habib at our gatherings. Our group was ordered to attack the Muslims, which would include Selika and civilians. And Your Honors, this is precisely what they did. The evidence will further show that Christians were warned of the attack in advance and advised to place palm branches in front of their houses to signal to the anti-Balaka which houses to spare. As my colleague mentioned earlier, this modus operandi was used in Gwen, Carnot, and Berberati. During the 5th December 2013 attack, the evidence will show that Yekatom's elements killed at least 6 Muslim civilians or perceived Selika supporters in Boeing and at least another 4 Muslims in Catin. Your Honors will hear from 2 anti-Balaka witnesses from Yekatom's group about their attack on the Boeing markets that morning. They are both clear that Yekatom planned and ordered the attack and that they participated in it at his direction. One of them provided a detailed account of that morning. His attack group entered the market. He saw the, quote, Arabs outside their shops, washing before their morning prayers. He is clear that he did not see the Arabs with guns and that he saw 6 Arabs shot and killed where they stood, but says they did not die straight away. They were still struggling on the ground. So he and other anti-Balaka members stabbed them to death. The other witness will describe how Yekatom ordered his elements to attack the Muslims and Selika at the Boeing market, and specifically to, quote, shoot the Muslims there. The evidence will also show that bodies of some of these Muslims were brought to the Ali Babolo Mosque in PK5, where they laid among over 60 Muslims who died in the broader 5th December 2013 attack on Bangui. Journalists took pictures of these bodies, one of which is on your screens before you. Yekatom's elements killed at least another 4 Muslims in Catin. None of these 4 victims were armed or otherwise engaged in combat. One witness will describe that while retreating from Catin on the 5th December 2013, anti-Balaka elements walked past his house and shouted that first they would kill Jatodia and then they would come back to kill all Muslims. The evidence will further show that from 5th December 2013 onwards, the Muslim residents of Boeing and Catin had no choice but to flee their homes to save their lives. They fled to the Muslim neighborhood of PK5 in Bangui's 3rd arrondissement, which quickly became the last Muslim enclave in Bangui. They also fled to other parts of Kar or to neighboring countries. Their forcible transfer, deportation, and displacement constitute a key part of the attack, for which both accused are charged. The 5th December 2013 attack and its aftermath caused the number of internally displaced people in the 3rd arrondissement to increase by 100,000 in the following month, before dropping to 20,000 in the first few months of 2014, as people fled the region. The evidence will show that approximately 99% of the city's Muslim population was gone by March 2014. Data from UNHCR and other organizations collected at the time of the incident corroborate the large flows of IDPs in Bangui in December 2013, as well as refugees fleeing Kar thereafter. One report collected data from 60 IDP sites for the week of 17 to 24 December 2013. It indicates that this 1 week saw an increase of IDPs by 98% in CAR for a total of approximately 424,000 IDPs in the country, as well as an increase of 73% in Bangui for a total of approximately 370,000 there. The rest, approximately 49,000 IDPs, were in Bosengoa. UNHCR reports from January 2014 corroborate these figures. They also show 86,000 refugees from Kar seeking help in neighboring countries. IDPs who were forced to stay in the PK5 enclave endured difficult conditions. As your honors can see from this map, the PK5 enclave was located in the 3rd arrondissement of Bangui, marked Kilo 5, circled here in yellow for your convenience. The evidence will also show that many of the remaining Muslims confined to the PK5 enclave were unable to leave it without risking death. Like the enclaves created in the wake of anti-Balaka attacks throughout Western CAR, the Muslim population enclaved in PK5 was forced to endure a lack of adequate food, shelter, and sanitation. One journalist who visited PK5 in December 2013 described it as, quote, a prison within a city. The journalist reported that the anti-Balaka had cut off the roads to and from the district, putting up barricades and checkpoints, and that the anti-Balaka made it difficult for NGOs to distribute food. The anti-Balaka warned the journalists that they risked being killed for befriending Muslims. With similar anti-Muslim animus, Yekatom also ordered the destruction of the Boeing mosque, one of many in Bangui destroyed by the anti-Balaka. Although witnesses' recollections differ on the exact date, the evidence will show it was destroyed in the immediate aftermath of the Bangui attack. Satellite imagery confirms this time frame. As your honors can see, the image before you includes an overview of Boeing, parts of Bangui, and the south edge of the Mpoko airport, visible as a green square. If you could go back, yes. Thank you. If we zoom in here, you can see inset 1 shows the progression of damage to the Boeing mosque. On the 27th of December 2013, you can see the mosque and surrounding buildings intact. And subsequent damage to these buildings can be seen by the 8th and 30th of December 2013. One anti-Balaka insider witness from Yekatom's group will testify how he and others in his group followed Yekatom's orders to destroy the mosque. Quote, we used rockets and grenades to destroy the walls of the mosque. We burned the roof using gasoline and matches. I saw people with canisters of gasoline bought in Boeing. I watched the mosque burn. Rambo was the most senior anti-Balaka and ordered us to destroy the mosque. end quote. Another witness saw the destroyed Boeing mosque and the Qurans that were burned and thrown to the ground. The imam of the mosque and his extended family fled the area on the 5th December 2013 because of the attack and never moved back. As your honors can see from this next slide, which is a screenshot from a video showing that all that is left of the mosque is a concrete slab. Your honors, the crimes and acts that I've just described were committed by Yekatom, his group, and other anti-Balaka elements in a coordinated offensive on Bangui, Kata, and Boeing, persecuting and violently targeting their Muslim civilian populations. It shows their common plan or purpose. It shows their collective intention to commit the charged crimes against Muslims, who based on their religious, national, or ethnic affiliation were perceived as collectively responsible for, complicit with, and supportive of the Salaka. The anti-Balaka's attack on these Muslim civilians deprived them of fundamental rights, including the right to life, liberty, dignity, and religious freedom. Moving now to Yekatom's knowledge and intent. His knowledge and intent for this incident is clear by virtue of his planning, ordering, and leading his elements in the attack, as well as his physical presence for many of the underlying crimes charged, carried out by his subordinates. Yekatom was also in contact with Maxime Mokom and other key anti-Balaka leaders immediately before the attack. With respect to ssonA's knowledge and intent, the anti-Balaka leadership coordinated offensives in areas in Western Kar on 5th December 2013, including Bangui, Boeing, Boda, and Bosangoa. The evidence will further show ssona helped plan the attack on Bangui and its surroundings. For example, by instructing several anti-Balaka groups to participate in the attack on Bangui, which was an essential component of the strategy to reclaim power. The evidence will also show that the participation of Yekatom's group in the Bangui attack was planned with members of this leadership. And that, for example, ssona sent money to Maxime Mokom in Zongo for ammunition, and that Yekatom himself picked up ammunition from Mokom in Zongo for his group to use in the 5th December offensive. ssona was also aware of the crimes committed by Yekatom and his group, which were reported in the media. Furthermore, ssona was a key member of the Froka group that my colleague described earlier, which vindicated and supported the 5th December attack, including during a radio broadcast on the very same day. Throughout the relevant time period, Yekatom reported to and coordinated with ssona, as Yekatom and his group operated under the national coordination. The evidence will show that after the 5th December 2013 attack, national coordination members representing ssona visited Yekatom's area of control, such as PK9 and the Yamwara school, and that they reported back to the coordination. Yekatom also sent at least 2 representatives to national coordination meetings. And despite this knowledge, ssona did not condemn the commission of crimes and did not act to end them. Instead, he covered for them. ssona validated Yekatom's actions by accepting Yekatom's membership in the group, recognizing him as a key anti-Balaka member, and inviting him to represent the anti-Balaka at high-level meetings, for example, on the 25th of January, 2014, with interim President Sama Panza, and at the July 2014 Brazzaville Summit. Turning now to the next incident, Your Honors, I will first provide an overview of the Yamwara school base and then describe the crimes that happened there in December 2013, followed by a description of the intent and knowledge of Yekatom, and finally ssona. Both accused are charged with counts 11 through 17 for this incident, including the war crimes of murder, cruel treatment, and torture, and the crimes against humanity of murder, torture, imprisonment, persecution, and other inhumane acts. As your honors can see from this map of Bimbo, Bimbo is at the western edge of Bangui. And the Amora School, also known as École Kokoro II, is located in Boeing, near the southwest corner of Mpoko Airport. This location is corroborated by satellite imagery provided by UNISAT, which your honors can see here in more detail. Looking now at Inset 3, this provides an aerial view of the school on the 8th of December, 2013. Yekatom converted the Amora School to a base for his group after the 5th December attack. The former school had several buildings that Yekatom could use to train and provide housing for his elements. The evidence will show Yekatom and his elements used this school as a base until around the time of Chitodia's resignation on 10th January 2014, when Yekatom and most of his elements moved to PK9 and onwards, southwest towards Mbaiki. Video evidence from 3 unrelated journalists takes us inside the school grounds in December 2013 and helps show Yekatom's command and control over his elements at that base. Your honors will see evidence in the form of an in-depth film about Yekatom and his group during this time, which covers the group's movements from Yamwara along the PK9 Mbaiki axis. This video, which was meant to be anti-Balaka propaganda, was found on the computer seized during Yekatom's arrest. Another journalist produced a video of Yekatom and his armed elements at Yamwara in mid-December 2013. I'll play a short excerpt in French showing young elements doing trainings and exercises inside Yamwara School. It also shows Yekatom boasting about how he obtained weapons for his group by attacking Seleka and taking their weapons. And I'll play the video.
Dans cette école abandonnée,
in this abandoned school, young fighters learn military discipline, methods of fighting, and physical training. They are a poorly armed coalition. Here, they have said that they would disarm if the French troops asked them, but on one condition, that France should demand the immediate departure of President Chitodia.
Your Honors, the young elements seen here are consistent with other video and witness evidence you will hear later in our presentation of child soldiers being stationed at the Yamwara School and other bases. A third journalist produced several video clips showing Yekatom at the Yamwara School and the training of his elements between the 13th and 17th of December 2013, several of which were broadcast and are available for your honors to view. Many witnesses, including insiders, will describe how in late December 2013, Yekatom's group abducted a group of men and women and took them to the Yamwara School base. One of the male detainees was brutally tortured and murdered there under Yekatom's orders, while the others were detained against their will, physically abused, and questioned about their ethnicity. The evidence shows that both Yekatom and his subordinates personally subjected the abductees to severe physical and mental injury. The evidence will show that the abductees were a mixed group of Muslims and Christians, friends and family. The anti-Balaka stopped them at a nearby checkpoint, searched them, and took their phones and jewelry. The men were beaten with sticks and threatened with death. The anti-Balaka elements brought the detainees to the Amora school base and to their chief, Yekatom, who was known to some of the victims. The victims were accused of being Muslims or Muslim sympathizers. The men and women were separated, forced to undress, and searched. Yekatom's elements joked that the men were reciting a Muslim prayer and talked about cutting the women to pieces. In Yekatom's presence, one of his deputies, Alcanto, accused the men of being traitors and told them they deserved to die. Yekatom agreed, and he ordered the beating of the male abductees. These men were forced to kneel, beaten with sticks, and repeatedly told they were going to die. Yekatom then gave the order to tie up and kill one of the men. The evidence will show his elements followed these orders. They tied his hands behind his back, together with his feet, and they beat him with brake cables and wooden sticks, hitting him so hard they broke his shin bones. Yekatom also ordered his ears be cut off. A member of Yekatom's group followed this order and cut off the ears with a knife. Multiple eyewitnesses corroborate this account. One heard him screaming, "My ear, my ear." The other described that the murder victim had his ear cut and there was lots of blood around his head. The evidence will show that one witness also saw Yekatom's deputy, Coeur de Lion, stab the murder victim in the neck with a knife. 10 to 20 minutes later, Yekatom's elements took the murder victim behind the house at the Yamwara school base. Your honors will hear this account corroborated by another member of Yekatom's group who saw Yekatom order the killing and give one of his elements a knife. This insider then watched other elements drag the victim to a freshly dug grave and dismember him. They then brought back the bloody knife to Yekatom at Yekatom's request. Later that night, 5 of the remaining detainees were transferred to a nearby house belonging to an anti-Balaka zone coordinator, Sylvester Yaguzu, who later became a member of the national coordination. Yekatom and Coeur de Lion visited the location the next morning. The evidence will show Yaguzu contacted the local government, including the mayor of Bangui, to help effectuate their release. The evidence will also show he contacted Sangaris, the French military operation in CAR. The detainees were released after a few days when Sangaris evacuated them in an armored car. Yekatom's knowledge and intent for this incident is clear, Your Honors. He ordered his subordinates to commit the crimes and was physically present during their torture and mistreatment of the detainees, even asking them to bring back the bloody knife. The evidence will further show that instead of disciplining elements involved in the crimes, he congratulated at least one of them, saying, quote, "Good job." Yekatom and his group committed the crimes and acts at Yamwara School as part of a coordinated effort to target Muslim civilians and their associates on the same basis described earlier for attacks in Bangui and Boeing. These acts deprive the victims of fundamental rights, including the right to life, liberty, and dignity. The evidence will also show that ssona intentionally contributed to the crimes committed at the Yamwara School, committed by Yekatom's group, acting pursuant to their common purpose. As my colleague Ms. Stuyven demonstrated, sson's contributions were aimed to further the anti-Balaka's criminal activity and purpose. They were made with the knowledge of the collective intention of the anti-Balaka to commit the types of crimes that took place at the Yamwara School, including murder, detention, and torture. sson's knowledge of this incident is supported by at least 3 factors. First, this was a high-profile incident. High-level anti-Balaka members, the mayor of Bangui and Sangaris, were all involved in negotiating the detainees' release. At the time of the incident, these high-level anti-Balaka members were subordinate to and held allegiance to Ngai. Second, the evidence will show that the direct perpetrators were in contact with anti-Balaka leadership while the victims were in their custody. Coeur de Lion personally confirmed the Yekatom's group had abducted these specific detainees to a senior leader subordinate to Ngai. Coeur de Lion added that he wanted them dead. Third, on or about the 27th of December 2013, while the victims were still in custody, over 24 anti-Balaka leaders, including Yekatom, met at the Yamwara school base. Participants included high-ranking anti-Balaka members who became members of the National Coordination under Ngai soon thereafter. And despite this knowledge, Ngai did not condemn the commission of these crimes. Instead, he covered for them and validated Yekatom's actions, as my colleague, Ms. Berdinikova, will explain in more detail tomorrow. This concludes the portion of the presentation on the Yamwara School, Your Honor. I'm happy to pause here or invite my colleague to come in. I'm in your hands.
I think it's close to 15:30. I think we are done for today. And we will meet again tomorrow at 9:30 and continue with the presentation by the prosecution.
All rise.